July 28, 1977, Baptist Memorial Hospital, Memphis, Tennessee, 3:42 a.m. Dr. George Nicopolis. Dr. Nick, to his most famous patient, sat alone in his office, staring at a prescription pad that would eventually help kill Elvis Presley. In 19 days, Elvis would be dead, and Dr. Nick would spend the rest of his life trying to convince the world that he'd been trying to save Elvis, not destroy him. But the truth was far more complicated. The truth was that Dr. Nick had written over 10,000 prescriptions for Elvis in the past year alone. Pills for energy, pills for sleep, pills for pain, pills for anxiety, pills for depression, pills to counteract the side effects of other pills. And tonight at 3:42 in the morning, Elvis was calling again, demanding more. "Doc, I need something to help me sleep. The show tonight wore me out. My back is killing me. I can't shut my mind off." Dr. Nick looked at Elvis's medical chart. In the past 72 hours, Elvis had been prescribed Dilaudid, hydromorphone, for pain, Percodan, oxycodone, for pain, Demerol, meperidine, for pain, Quaalude, methaqualone, for sleep, Placidol, ethchlorvinol, for sleep, Seconal, secobarbital, for sleep, Dexedrine, amphetamine, for energy, Ritalin, methylphenidate, for focus. Mixing central nervous system depressants like this was medically insane. The combination would eventually stop Elvis's heart and breathing. But if Dr. Nick said no, Elvis would fire him and find another doctor, someone who would prescribe even more dangerous combinations. At least Dr. Nick could monitor Elvis, could try to substitute placebos when possible, could attempt to manage the addiction even while feeding it. That's what Dr. Nick told himself, that he was helping, that he was the only thing standing between Elvis and total pharmaceutical catastrophe. What Dr. Nick didn't know, what nobody knew until it was too late, was that Colonel Tom Parker had been orchestrating Elvis's drug dependency for years, not to help Elvis perform, but to keep him controllable, exhausted, and unable to escape the contracts that were slowly killing him. And in 19 days, those drugs would finish what Parker had started 21 years earlier when Elvis signed that 56-page contract. But to understand how Elvis died, we need to understand how the pills became his prison, and how Colonel Parker held the key to that prison until the very end. Part 1. The Pain, 1973. When the pills became necessary. Elvis's drug use didn't start as addiction, it started as medical necessity, or at least that's how it was presented. In 1973, Elvis's body was breaking down from years of punishing performance schedules. Colonel Parker had been booking 150-plus shows per year, often with back-to-back performances that gave Elvis no time to recover. 2 shows a night in Las Vegas, night after night, week after week. Elvis's back, injured years earlier during a stage performance, was in constant agony. His knees hurt, his neck hurt, everything hurt. "I need something for the pain, Doc," Elvis told Dr. Nick during a visit in March 1973. "I can't perform feeling like this." Dr. Nick prescribed Percodan, a reasonable painkiller for short-term use, but Elvis wasn't using it short-term. He was performing 150 shows per year. The short-term became permanent. Within months, Elvis needed higher doses. His body was building tolerance. What had started as 10 milligrams per day became 20 milligrams. Then 40 milligrams. "The pain isn't getting better, Doc. I need something stronger." Dr. Nick prescribed Dilaudid, a more powerful opioid, more addictive. But Elvis was in pain, and he needed to perform. What else could Dr. Nick do? What Dr. Nick didn't realize, what he wouldn't realize for years, was that Colonel Parker was deliberately keeping Elvis on this brutal schedule specifically to ensure Elvis needed the pills. A healthy, sober Elvis might have had the clarity and energy to fight Parker, might have hired better lawyers, might have found a way out of the contracts. But an Elvis dependent on pills, exhausted, foggy, desperate for anything that would help him get through one more show, that Elvis would keep performing, keep making money, keep being controllable. Parker didn't create Elvis's pain, but he exploited it, and he made sure Elvis never had enough rest to heal. Part 2. The Sleep. 1974. When sleep became impossible. The pain pills helped Elvis perform, but they made it impossible to sleep. Opioids create a wired, anxious state despite being depressants. Elvis would finish a show at midnight, still buzzing with adrenaline and chemicals, unable to shut his mind off. "I can't sleep, Doc. I lie there for hours. My mind just races." Dr. Nick prescribed Placidol, a powerful sedative. "Take one before bed. It should help." It helped for 3 days. Then Elvis needed 2. Soon Elvis was taking a cocktail of sedatives every night, 3 or 4 different pills, all depressing his central nervous system, all interacting in dangerous ways. But without them, Elvis couldn't sleep at all. And without sleep, he couldn't perform. And if he couldn't perform, Parker would threaten him with breach of contract lawsuits. Elvis was trapped in a chemical cycle. Uppers to perform, downers to sleep. more uppers because the downers made him groggy, more downers because the uppers made him wired, and every month the doses increased. Dr. Nick tried to intervene. "Elvis, we need to cut back. This combination is dangerous. I'll cut back after this tour," Elvis promised. "Just get me through this tour." But there was always another tour. Parker kept booking them. 50 shows, 70 shows, 100 shows. Elvis never got the break he needed to detox, never got the chance to heal, because Parker needed him working, needed him making money, needed him too exhausted to fight back. Part 3, The Dependency. 1975, when addiction became undeniable. By 1975, Elvis wasn't taking pills to perform anymore. He was taking pills to function, to get out of bed, to face the day, to feel normal. This is when addiction crosses from physical dependency to psychological prison, when the drugs stop being a tool and become the only thing keeping you alive. Elvis would wake up and immediately reach for Dexedrine. Without it, he couldn't face the day. Then Ritalin to focus, then Percodan for pain, then more Dexedrine because the Percodan made him drowsy. By noon, he'd taken 10 pills. By bedtime, 30. His friends were terrified. "Elvis, you're gonna kill yourself," his girlfriend Linda Thompson told him. "I'm fine," Elvis insisted. "These are prescribed by a doctor. They're legal. I'm not some junkie on the street." This was the lie Elvis told himself. The lie Dr. Nick enabled. The lie Parker encouraged. Because as long as Elvis believed the pills were medicine rather than addiction, he wouldn't seek real help, wouldn't check into rehab, wouldn't take time off to recover. He'd just keep performing, keep taking pills, keep making money for Parker. Parker visited Elvis in Vegas in October 1970. Elvis looked terrible, bloated, exhausted, confused. But Parker didn't suggest rest. He suggested more shows. "We've got commitments, my boy," Parker said. "Can you handle 50 more shows before Christmas?" Elvis was so drugged he could barely process the question. "Yeah, Colonel, whatever you say." That conversation, Elvis agreeing to 50 more shows while barely conscious, was recorded by one of Elvis's security team. Years later, that recording would surface as evidence of Parker's exploitation. But at the time, nobody stopped it. Elvis kept performing, kept taking pills, kept dying slowly. Part 4, The Intervention That Failed. February 1977, 6 months before Elvis died. Elvis's inner circle finally staged an intervention. His father Vernon, his girlfriend Ginger Alden, his bodyguards, his close friends, they all confronted Elvis about the pills. "You need help," Vernon said, crying. "Real help. Not more pills. Actual rehab." Elvis was furious. "I don't need rehab. I'm not an addict. These are prescribed medications." "Elvis, you're taking 50 pills a day," one of his bodyguards said. "That's addiction. Dr. Nick prescribes them. They're legal." This was the problem. Because the pills were prescribed, Elvis genuinely didn't believe he was an addict. He believed he was a pain patient, an insomniac, someone with legitimate medical problems being treated by a licensed physician. The intervention failed. Elvis stormed out, fired 2 of the bodyguards who'd participated, refused to speak to his father for a week, and called Dr. Nick immediately. "I need refills on everything." Dr. Nick should have said no, should have insisted on rehab, should have cut Elvis off. But Dr. Nick had his own trap. He'd become dependent on Elvis's money and fame. His entire medical practice was now built around being Elvis's doctor. If he lost Elvis as a patient, he'd lose his reputation, his income, his identity. So Dr. Nick kept prescribing. What neither Elvis nor Dr. Nick realized was that Colonel Parker had quietly been paying Dr. Nick bonuses. Performance incentives, Parker called them. Payments that coincidentally increased whenever Elvis performed more shows. Dr. Nick was being financially rewarded for keeping Elvis functional, not healthy, just functional enough to perform. This wouldn't be discovered until years after Elvis's death, when Parker's financial records were subpoenaed. But the evidence was clear. Dr. Nick had received over $200,000 from Parker over 3 years. Money that wasn't payment for medical services, but rather incentives to keep Elvis working. Dr. Nick later claimed he didn't understand what the payments were for, that he thought Parker was just being generous. But the timing of the payments, always after particularly brutal tour schedules, told a different story. Part 5, The Final Tour. June 1970. Elvis's last performances. Elvis's final tour was a nightmare. He forgot lyrics. He slurred words. He sometimes fell asleep on stage between songs. Videos from these performances are painful. A dying man being propped up and displayed for profit. But Parker kept booking shows. 55 shows between June and August 19. Almost 2 shows every 3 days. With travel between cities, no real rest, no chance to recover. Elvis's bodyguards begged Parker to cancel some shows. "He can't do this, Colonel. He's too sick." "He'll be fine," Parker said dismissively. "Just make sure Dr. Nick gives him what he needs to get through the shows." Translation: keep pumping him full of pills. The bodyguards later testified that Elvis was taking pills every 2 hours during this tour. Uppers before shows, downers after, painkillers constantly. He was barely conscious between performances, sleeping in his hotel room with a doctor monitoring his breathing because they were afraid he'd stop breathing in his sleep. This was no longer a man performing. This was a man being weekend at Bernied through concert venues for profit. And everyone around Elvis knew it, but nobody stopped it. Why? Because Parker had created an ecosystem where everyone's income depended on Elvis performing. The bodyguards got paid. Dr. Nick got paid. The musicians got paid. The venues got paid. Parker got paid. If Elvis stopped working, hundreds of people lost income. So the incentive was always to keep him working, keep him medicated, keep the machine running, even if it killed him. Part 6, August 1 to 15th, 1977. The final days. Elvis returned to Graceland on August 1st after his final show in Indianapolis. He was supposed to start another tour on August 17th, 12 shows in 11 days. But Elvis was dying. Everyone could see it. He was bloated, pale, barely able to walk. His breathing was labored. He hadn't had a bowel movement in weeks because the opioids had shut down his digestive system. Dr. Nick visited Graceland multiple times in the first 2 weeks of August. He could see Elvis was in crisis, but instead of hospitalizing him, instead of forcing detox, Dr. Nick kept prescribing. Why? Because Parker had called Dr. Nick and reminded him about the August 17th tour start date. "We can't cancel, Doc. We've got contractual commitments. Just keep him functional for 2 more weeks." So Dr. Nick prescribed more pills, told himself he was managing the situation, that he'd force Elvis into rehab after the August tour. But Elvis didn't have 2 more weeks. On August 15th, Elvis asked Dr. Nick for sleeping pills. The prescriptions from that day, later entered as evidence in court, included Dialidad 10 mg tablets, quantity 30, Percodan 5 mg tablets, quantity 40, Dexedrine 15 mg tablets, quantity 30, Dicon 15 mg tablets, quantity 30. This was enough medication to sedate an elephant. Dr. Nick later claimed he'd told Elvis to take only as directed, but Elvis had been taking 3 times the directed dose for years. That night, August 15th going into August 16th, Elvis took at least 10 pills trying to sleep. His body, weakened by years of abuse, couldn't process them all. At 2:30 p.m. on August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found dead on his bathroom floor. He was 42 years old. The autopsy revealed 14 different drugs in his system at toxic levels. The medical examiner concluded Elvis died of polypharmacy, death by drug interaction. Elvis didn't die of a heart attack, as Parker's public statement claimed. He died of an overdose, prescribed by his doctor, enabled by his manager, a death that had been 21 years in the making. Part 7, The Connection. How the 1956 contract led to the 1977 overdose. When Elvis signed Colonel Parker's contract in 1956, he didn't just sign away his career, he signed away his life, because that contract gave Parker control over Elvis's schedule, his workload, his every professional decision, and Parker used that control to work Elvis so hard that Elvis needed drugs to function. The pain, the exhaustion, the sleeplessness, it wasn't accidental. It was the inevitable result of 150-plus shows per year for 20 years. Parker knew this, had to have known, but he didn't care because he had his own addictions to feed gambling. By 1977, Parker owed Las Vegas casinos over $5 million. The only way to pay these debts was to keep Elvis working, so Parker kept booking shows, kept pushing Elvis's schedule, kept ignoring his deteriorating health. And when Elvis needed pills to keep up with Parker's brutal schedule, Parker facilitated that too, paying Dr. Nick bonuses, pressuring him to keep Elvis functional, creating an environment where everyone's financial interest lay in keeping Elvis drugged and working rather than healthy and resting. The contract Parker wrote in 1956 contained a clause stating it was binding for the lifetime of the artist. Parker had meant this to ensure he'd profit from Elvis's entire career, but in practice, it meant Parker could work Elvis until his lifetime ended, which in August 1977, it finally did. Elvis died fulfilling the terms of that contract, worked to death, medicated to death, exploited to death. Epilogue, The Trial, 1980-1981, Dr. Nick faces justice. 3 years after Elvis died, Dr. George Nichopoulos was charged with prescribing drugs in excessive amounts and for illegitimate purposes. The state of Tennessee wanted his medical license revoked and criminal charges filed. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Dr. Nick had prescribed over 10,000 pills to Elvis in the 10 months before his death, that these prescriptions were medically unjustifiable, that Dr. Nick had known Elvis was addicted but continued prescribing anyway. Dr. Nick's defense was simple: I was trying to keep him alive. If I'd cut him off, he'd have found another doctor, someone who would have prescribed even more dangerous combinations. At least I could monitor him. It was a compelling argument, and after a lengthy trial, Dr. Nick was acquitted of criminal charges. The jury believed he'd been trying to help Elvis, not kill him. But the deeper truth, the truth about Parker's financial payments to Dr. Nick, the truth about the brutal schedule that necessitated the pills, the truth about the contract that trapped Elvis in a cycle of exhaustion and addiction, that truth didn't come out until later. In 1995, Dr. Nickopoulos finally lost his medical license, not for Elvis's death, but for a pattern of overprescribing to other patients. He spent the rest of his life defending his treatment of Elvis, insisting he'd done his best in an impossible situation. Maybe he had. Maybe Dr. Nick really was trying to help, trying to manage an addiction he couldn't cure, trying to keep Elvis alive in a system designed to work him to death. But the pills still killed Elvis, and Dr. Nick's signature was on every prescription. As for Colonel Parker, he never faced any consequences. He continued collecting 50% of Elvis's estate revenues until Elvis's ex-wife Priscilla sued him in 19... A court found Parker had breached his fiduciary duty and engaged in self-dealing, but by then Parker had already taken millions. Parker died in 1997, 20 years after Elvis, having outlived the man he'd exploited. He never admitted any wrongdoing, never acknowledged his role in Elvis's death, never showed remorse. To the end, Parker insisted he'd made Elvis a star, that Elvis should be grateful. But the truth is simpler and darker. Colonel Parker worked Elvis Presley to death to pay off gambling debts, and when Elvis needed pills to survive the schedule Parker imposed, Parker facilitated the addiction that killed him. The prescription that killed Elvis wasn't written by Dr. Nick. It was written in 1956, in 56 pages of contract language that gave Colonel Tom Parker total control over Elvis Presley's life. And Parker used that control to destroy the greatest entertainer of the 20th century, one prescription at a time.